If we want Palestine to be free, then we need to be getting on board with the demands of the Palestinian Liberation Movement, and we need to be fighting in solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters and siblings. And I also think in a similar way to the way that the conversation exploded around abolition 4 years ago, we're seeing a mass consciousness awakening in this moment around Palestine. And folks, I think, are having a quicker evolution around some of these ideas than they might have had before, especially Jews. And there are more Jews that are joining the movement for a free Palestine now than at any point previously, that are seeing what's been happening and learning that it's actually much clearer than they think, and that these ideas of things being complicated or complex or confusing are kind of a distraction.
We're doing something different because we're highlighting our relationship with one another, and that's the biggest part, especially if you come from a place like New York. Huge Jewish population, huge Black population, and huge Arab Muslim population, and a lot of times I've said this before, like moving like ships in the night. Right? And again, when we think about why we're having this conversation, because especially like a place like New York, we have to get to a certain point. We're at an election season. We have to figure out what the fuck is going on, because again, we're uncovering how geopolitics trickles down into our very neighborhoods in America, here in Brooklyn, New York, and how we are interacting with each other, and that these are all connected. And so we're just trying to set the foundation. We don't see these conversations, this type of conversation happening, and this is to build, right? Even from when we started, we've just learned so much, right? When you talk about the fear, I'm just like, oof, we've had this conversation on the grapevine. That was hard. It was something, what was that, how many years ago?
Like 4 or 5.
4 or 5 years ago.
6?
6 years ago. Obviously we were having it with just the Jewish and the Black community, but again, that never aired because of the fear. This is the part that I really want to get to. It's like everyone is fearful of certain things, and sometimes you have to say the wrong thing. Sometimes you have to fuck up. Sometimes and again, everything is so politicized, so that's why everybody's so careful with every little word and editing everything. And then we become all manufactured. But if we get to capture this moment of where we are, like how we got here, where we are and where we're going, I think that's just a great start and a great foundation to what we want to see for not just ourselves, but what we want to see for the world.
How do you feel about the state of Israel and its right to exist? Is there a world in your mind where Israel is now a free Palestine, or everybody's in one state?
These are the big questions.
I know.
I don't fully know if I have an answer. It's a tough moment. Part of me believes that the two-state solution is not viable any longer. Right. And that we've gotten past the point of believing that that the state of Israel and a state of Palestine could coexist. I could be wrong. There have been things that have been happening even just in the last couple of weeks in terms of relationships internationally between countries. Like, I think I saw something earlier today that the president of Colombia made a statement about breaking some form of relations with Israel. There have been moments in certain European countries and in South Africa where they've made moves toward recognizing a state of Palestine. I think maybe there's a chance that that there still is a possibility for two states. Maybe there's a possibility that, I've heard a really compelling case that the future of Palestine and of Israel looks a lot like South Africa, that post-apartheid, that there's maybe some sort of single democratic state with strong minority protections, because I think if it becomes a single democratic state, Israelis and Jews would be in the minority in terms of the population. Yes. So politically, I think there needs to be strong minority protections if that is the case. I don't know. It's a hard moment to be predicting the future geopolitically in that region. I'm pretty focused on ending the war. I feel like the immediate concern is figuring out how we can stop the bombing and the killing, and almost as many as 50,000 people probably will die in Gaza and some in the West Bank also, is my sense, before anything changes or stops. I think we need to be pulling out all the stops to try to end this war, to bring about a ceasefire, to stop the bombing. There are people who are a lot smarter and a lot more sophisticated than I am that are probably considering all of the political possibilities for what a state might actually look like. I'm feel more connected to diaspora than I do to thinking about the future of the state of Israel.
Yeah, understood. Thank you for that, because I know it's a hard question.
Yeah.
We were talking to Queen, and she mentioned positive peace and negative peace, and sort of like negative peace being this, we immediately address this issue, like right now, ceasefire right now, no violence right now. And this positive peace part, which is really about making sure that we sort of address the root issues and create systems, which takes a longer time.
Yeah.
So is there an answer for right now? Probably not. It's just one of those things where we've been talking about peace in the Middle East for a long time. And now that we've reached this particular point, my curiosity is just jumping around as in like, well, what the fuck is going to actually happen here? Because, you know, this is my opinion. This is not based on anyone's fact. This is just based on what I'm seeing, where I see a real intention for a land grab here. And it feels very deliberate. It feels very purposeful. Yes, it's off the heels of a tragedy. Like you mentioned, it didn't start on October 7th, but we can acknowledge the tragedy. But it seemed like a pathway for something that just seems a little sinister to me, or very sinister.
Yes.
And so to acknowledge that and to sort of think about like, well, what is the way in which you now remedy this? What is the way in which you actually give liberation to these folks that are in the Gaza Strip, or that are currently being more and more violated in the West Bank, for example? You can't say on one end that we should understand that, you know, Israel has a right to exist and this is about peace, when we're also seeing these images of people who are in the West Bank being still removed from their homes violently and killed, of course, in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. It's so confusing. And I think for anyone who is sympathetic to the plight of Jewish people, like myself, and who can understand that there is a need for a place for anyone to seek refuge, and so we can understand that, it's at what cost? And then based on that cost, is you can't do that. And it has to stop. And so it's just a hard conversation to not only be a part of, as you are a Jewish person, but then it's also very difficult to even take part of someone who's not a part of the community. Because we understand that right now, people in Palestine they're like, speak up for us. And they're so grateful. Like I've seen the videos from Isan and from like Motaz. Mm-hmm. And it's been encouraging to see them smile again, because they see that people are advocating for them. But I'm thinking about the long road. And I'm like, well, what's going to happen to everyone? Like, is this, they're not going to have a home to live? What happens to all of the Gazans who no longer have, no shade, but barely the strip that they had? What happens to them?
Right.
And so I'm very, very curious about that. So I know it's a hard question.
Well, yeah, I think it is hard. And also, I appreciate that framing of positive and negative peace. You know, I think the demand for a ceasefire is the floor. You know, it is the minimum. It is, we need to stop people from dying in this moment. But ceasefire is not a long-term political strategy.
Right.
You know, we need to be having conversations about what comes after ceasefire.
Yeah.
I think whatever happens ultimately will need a kind of truth and reconciliation reparations process.
Absolutely.
That we need to start thinking about what it actually looks like to have that process in a way that considers the fact that Palestinians have been continually dispossessed from their land. Mm-hmm. To this point about land, you know, over the last 100 or so years, Palestinians have been systematically dispossessed from their land. And you know, there's this map that goes around that shows the shrinking.
Yes, I've seen it.
There's the shrinking of the land of Palestinians, and even that is not fully accurate. Like, there's been more dispossession than what is represented in what a lot of people see in those maps too. So. Yeah, I mean, I just, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Cairo with a very dear friend of mine, Mira, who is from Gaza, has lived in Gaza City, and, you know, her home was destroyed.
Wow.
And lived in the South for many, many months in a house that was meant for fortunately had a friend who had a house and lived in this house for you know, the most of the 6 months, with 27 people living in this house that was meant for 5 people or 7 people. You know, walking long distances to find water, not knowing whether or not this particular area that they were staying in was going to be bombed or not. Hearing stories of the raiding of their home by Israeli occupation forces, and it's heartbreaking, and it's devastating, and you also hear about, you hear like Jared Kushner talking about like the real estate opportunities for Israeli resorts on the coast of Gaza.
Psychopath.
Yeah, absolutely.
What the fuck?
Not to mention the real estate industry that is like, selling settlement land here in Brooklyn. You can go to an event and you can buy settlement land in the West Bank, and then you show up at the airport as an American Jew. Talk about apartheid. Like, you can show up at the airport. I could show up at the airport in Israel, just go on my phone and buy a ticket, and like land at the airport in Israel. No visa, no preparation. I could do it right now, and I could fly tomorrow. And I could show up at the airport, and there'll be a desk that says, "Oh, welcome, American Jew, and are you ready to make Aliyah?" And I can get my Israeli citizenship right there and then.
Wow.
Meanwhile, not only are Palestinians being massacred, but for in this moment, but have been consistently denied all sorts of freedoms of movement across the West Bank, and in and out of Gaza. I know many people many Palestinians who've gotten scholarships to American universities and who've not been able to go because they couldn't get a visa to be able to leave through the checkpoint. So it's just like compounding dispossessions.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, that is apartheid. That description, okay? Just because everyone seems to be confused about what the fuck it means. But I want to go back down this road of positive peace and multicultural coalition, because, that is at the root of this conversation. Just this understanding of like, well, how the fuck do we move forward? We've been here before, maybe not in this type of way as it pertains to Palestine. I can acknowledge that I've never seen this. It's exciting to see that so many people are raising their voices for Palestinians. It is about fucking time. It's sad, again, that it came in the face of such tragedy, but this seems to be a theme of how humans fucking learn. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know about how you feel about this multicultural coalition part, because obviously you are working with Palestinians, you are working with the Arab community, and I'm sure there are other kinds of people who are around. But off of the heels of George Floyd, we've seen that people were able to coalesce around this idea that Black people should not be treated this way. And state-sanctioned violence should not be allowed to enact itself on Black bodies in this way. We agreed on that for 3.5 years. And so folks were like, we're tired of this. Black people are causing a lot of problems in the world. Airplanes are falling out of the sky. My wife left me. It's Black people's fault. Let's roll back the DEI. And so we've been able to sort of see this progress and then immediate regression.
Yeah.
And so I have that concern, but I know that the bit that we got, the $4 that we got, that everybody got during that time, was because of multicultural coalition. And I'm curious to know, with certain themes like anti-Blackness, you mentioned your own family and certain people in your family not getting it, not understanding. How do you feel about within the Jewish community? Is there a thirst? Is there a curiosity of multicultural coalition going across communities to be able to figure out like what's going on and how do we work together? Do you think there's an appetite in your community for that?
I think in some parts of the community there is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in some parts of the community there's a really important history of it too. Yeah. You can go back to some of the more obvious examples that people point to of like Rabbi Heschel marching with King and all of that, but there is a long history of radical Jews, especially radical feminist lesbian Jews who are at the intersection of queerness and marginalization around their gender identity, and also around their solidarity and support for Palestine. Many of the founders of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, where I do a lot of organizing, were in the early 90s these radical lesbians who were organizing against police violence around Rodney King, started in early 1994, and then also organizing around Palestine. Had been organizing since the 80s, 70s and 80s around a free Palestine, and end to the occupation and end to the siege of Gaza. And so I think all of these issues are connected. I think when we organize against state violence and state repression, we have to talk about the Angela Davis book on Ferguson and Palestine is a great example of this.
Absolutely.
the G4S, this company that builds the border wall, in the South in the U.S. is the same company that built the border wall in Palestine, and same company that builds cages and infrastructure for our prison systems.
It's a private security corporation. It engages in the ownership and operation of private prisons, private policing, and many other activities related to policing and surveillance and imprisonment. Security, as propounded by those who believe that security can only be achieved by violence, whether structural violence or actual violence, that is the position represented by this corporation. And of course, it has played a major role in upholding the occupation in Palestine. This company also provides transportation for the deportation of Mexican immigrants. So if one looks at that corporation, I think that all of the issues that we are addressing can be seen in a sense. The private corporations recognize the intersectionality of issues and struggles, and we have to do that as well.
Like the repression that Black folks experience in this country and around the world, the repression that Palestinians are experiencing are deeply connected. Yeah. And I think if we can do some political education around that and show people that these movements are connected, and that what we all saw in 2020 around the murder of George Floyd, and what I saw last night with phalanx of 600 police officers from the same units that were kettling last night in the same way that they were told by the federal government that they can't kettle after the 2020 protests. They're absolutely connected. Mm-hmm. And talking about the indiscriminate violence and killing of Black folks by the state and by the NYPD, specifically here in our city, is connected to the conversation we need to have about the way that protesters are repressed by the NYPD today. And the more bridges that we can build between these movements, the stronger we're all going to be. Yeah. I also think we need to be teaching our kind of radical movement history. And I think young people need to be learning the history of social movements, mm-hmm. and need to be learning the history of solidarity in social movements. Because one of the other things that white supremacy and power structures love to do is teach us how divided we are and teach us how disconnected we are from having an opportunity to fight together. And, there are examples, going back throughout the history of social movements that show kind of these coalitions of folks from all different backgrounds who are fighting together for collective liberation. Mm-hmm. Like collective liberation, I think, needs to be our North Star. It's like, why do you think Fred Hampton was one of the first people killed,
I agree. The Rainbow Coalition. And, it's just so frustrating sometimes as a Black person. We just interviewed someone who was just mentioning, like, it wasn't until, she lost a family member in the West Bank who was shot down. Mm. It was then when she was then asked by someone, well, what did he do? Well, why did they shoot him? What did he do? Where she was just like, oh, that's how Black people must feel. Mm-hmm. And like that those moments of like, do you see why we say defund the police? Do you see what they're doing? Like, it's us today, it's you tomorrow. And I know we've been chanting these things for such a long time. And it can be like you're living in a permanent lit up situation, just gaslight central. Yeah. When people aren't able to see these things until they're the ones sitting in it. And I'm just like, I agree with you. I think that multicultural coalition is the way. And I'm saying this as someone who did not believe this 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was like, fuck everybody else. Black people, it's just us. We got to do what we got to do. We have to fight. We have to stand up. We have to give each other opportunities. And while I still believe a lot of those things, I'm now I understand that George Floyd, that moment was a phenomenon in its way, because we've seen the plight for social justice continuing and going on and on and on. But I do think anti-Blackness is such a powerful, powerful tool of white supremacy, because by association, anti-Blackness, you automatically get power. You get power. You get power. You get power because you're not Black. Right. And so while people are sort of thinking about things in that context, it makes it that much harder to move past that barrier. And so I'm wondering, like, does this have to get worse? are we there? Like, what happens as a next step for us? And so I'm curious for you. Like, I'm not asking you to predict the future, but we do have an election coming up. And what I'm hearing, especially on...
Do we have an election coming?
We have something coming up where we have an
interesting.
alleged election coming up.
So interesting.
We have an alleged fair and free election coming up.
In this country?
Yes. And there's a lot of conversation happening, especially when you get into, people, the CNN polls, the different polls that are happening right now, where Biden and Trump are neck and neck. And so there's this debate going on of like, who's the lesser of these two evils? We have one-party voters right now, and understandably so, who are like, they're doing this in Palestine. I'm not voting for this motherfucker. We saw that in Michigan with the results of the primary. So for me, it's very much like, this is a quote unquote very, very important election. And now they're starting to turn their attention on the students and suggesting that they are the ones who can potentially ruin the opportunity for Biden to take the presidency again and make sure that we stay safe and nice when so many of us don't feel safe and nice. I'm wondering, how do you feel as like a person who can vote in this country? Like, do you feel that there is a right way to vote in this upcoming election? Do you think that it's a shit show? I mean, you've already kind of alluded to a little bit of how you feel, but how do you feel about that right now?
Oh man, I don't want. I'm not interested really in either of these guys getting elected. It's really tough. I am irate at Joe Biden.
Understand.
Biden has also been articulating himself as a Zionist for like 30 years. You go back in all these interviews and he's like, I'm a proud Zionist. He went on the Seth Meyers show the other day and was like, just to make it clear, Jack, I'm a proud Zionist and I always have been. So like, there's no question about that. And there's no question that despite what many people are arguing and articulating that the Biden administration is doing behind the scenes to try to end the war, I don't actually believe that Biden has had any teeth in this, and also Netanyahu very clearly thinks that Trump is going to win, and so is disregarding anything Biden is telling him anyway.
It's just ridiculous.
And at the same time, I know that a Trump presidency means that all of our movements are just going to be on the back foot the whole time, just playing defense, like just defending our people, just trying to protect against deportations, just trying to protect against, like left organizers going to jail, just trying to protect against an increase in police violence. Yeah. I think many more Palestinians will probably die if Trump is elected.
Yeah.
So it's tough. I've been really inspired by the uncommitted movement. I think it's been really powerful and really beautiful, and hopefully the Biden administration, starts listening to that sooner than later, because the repercussions for them are going to be really severe.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizers I know, to be completely honest, are talking about what do we do in 2028.
Wow. But you know what? That's real as fuck.
Like the next 4 years, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really real, because I think a lot of people are at that point now where it's like, it's so obvious that this is a complete joke, and it's so obvious that there is no lesser of two evils. I will admit that I'm a little bit more scared of a Trump presidency.
Me also.
And I have to be transparent about that, because the guy he's giving a certain level of crazy that, while Joe Biden, of course, is genocide Joe, we know that. However, this guy has already promised that he would be worse. He's already promised what he would, kind of like alluded to what he would do to these college students. He's already spoken about literally like killing his adversaries, or like, I could do that if I wanted to. And so I'm thinking, like, if this guy is saying that, we saw what he did with the courts, it's like, I don't want to say like, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. I've actually publicly said that I won't, because I find what he's doing to be so incredibly asinine and just so weak that you just seem like you can do anything. And so when you kind of like mention, like, fuck that guy, like he's not even like really an important factor here, I think for that reason, I do kind of look at Trump as like the worst one. In my opinion. I would
agree. And to be very clear, I do think that a Trump presidency would be a lot worse than a Biden presidency in a lot of reasons, in a lot of ways. I think there are things that Biden has done that have been positive. Biden has been a friend to and supportive of organized labor. Biden has been, a stronger advocate than most previous presidents have been around reproductive rights. There have been a lot of things that, the Inflation Reduction Act, and there's student loans. I mean, there have been things that I think we can praise Biden for. And one of the other things that's I think important about Biden is that he has shown in some cases that he's responsive to the left. That when Bernie gives him a call, or when there's a left movement that's pushing him really hard on something, student loans is a good example of this. He has shown that he is and can be responsive to that.
Yeah.
Trump will be none of that, and Trump wants to put people like me in jail. I mean, Trump has.
That's what I'm really scared of.
Trump has said any anti-Zionist, he specifically said anti-Zionist Jewish organizers, we'll just round them up and put them all in jail.
Yeah.
So I think like they're anti-Semitic, they're not real Jews, blah, blah, blah. So I do think in a lot of ways, a Trump presidency would be a lot worse for this country than a Biden presidency would be. And also at the same time, it's hard not to feel deeply disappointed and deeply angry with Biden in this moment also. So I don't know exactly. I don't know.
I feel
I don't know what I'm going to do.
Exact same way.
So
I feel the exact same way, because we can acknowledge some of the things that he's done, but it's also like, but you're crazy. You're a crazy person because of what you're allowing to happen. And how can I in good faith do that? So I agree. They should take this very, very seriously, that there are people who don't have the luxury of not having family being killed right now in Palestine. Because if your family is being murdered right now, or friends of yours, or whatever the case is, how can you possibly vote for him?
Exactly, yeah.
So if it all goes to shit, it goes to shit, and then we figure out 2028. Right. It's just this idea of like, is there going to be anything left? I think a lot of people are posed with this question, and they're going to have to figure this out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
Climate and environmental justice is another example. Like Trump tried to dismantle the EPA and did in many cases dismantle a lot of environmental laws and protections. And I think the next 4 to 8 years we're going to see, even more warming seas and rising sea levels and crazier storms. And, and like the climate catastrophe is coming, and I think we need to be prepared for that existential threat as well. And I think, as much as I hate to say it, like a Democratic presidential administration is going to be better for that than the president who wants to like let emissions rip and end all environmental protection. So I think there are like very real consequences to a Trump presidency. And also I think in general, I guess we need to get organized. We need to be better organized around holding Biden accountable.
That part.
Also,
Yeah, I agree. And we don't have a lot of time. So
exactly.
I don't know what's going to happen, but
exactly.
we have to really figure this out. And so like, there is no answer, Sway, for this, but it's more so about just like putting it in everybody's consciousness that yes, we have very real threats that are happening, but then there's also a space where we have to actually make decisions. And if we do not, or if things go a certain way, we should be prepared for said decisions. So are you prepared to build a bunker? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Like these are real questions.
And the down ballot races too, I think, really matter.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
Jamal Bowman, for example,
Yes.
is in a very vulnerable position. Cori Bush is in a very vulnerable position. Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Summer Lee just won her primary. So these progressive left leaders, which we don't have very many of at the federal level, I think we need to be fighting to protect their seats also, because they're really they're as much as we can't rely on, we have to rely on each other, and we have to build toward collective liberation in a way that does not rely on the government. We also have electeds in some of these positions that are good advocates for the things that we care about and believe in, and we need to fight for and defend those seats too.
Yeah, really
at every level. At every level.
Great point. There are a lot of positions that we should be voting for, and then also this should be somewhat of a safeguard for whomever winds up in power as a president, for us to be very, very aware of our local elections. So that's a really great point. I have one more question for you, and then we're going to wrap. So I've seen a lot of this, obviously online. Obviously, the media is picking this up, but you've been on the ground. I want to bring it back to the college kids. Shout out to the college kids. Shout out to all of the kids that you've mentioned specifically, like at CUNY, who do not have an abundance of resources like Columbia students may. Where if they lose this opportunity, that could mean a lot for them, or if they get doxxed, or God forbid, any of the other things that we've seen happen to other students, like at Harvard, for example, they don't really have a safety net. One of the things that keeps coming up right now, and that I think is also distressing distraction is this slogan of "From the river to the sea." Palestine will be free. And as a Jewish man, I really, really want to know your opinion on this slogan that people are now, of course, canonizing and sort of like villainizing at the same time, and sort of painting a broad brush that this is an anti-Semitic trope. How do you feel about this slogan? What does it mean to you?
I think "From the river to the sea" gets really exceptionalized. I understand why some people are made uncomfortable by it. I understand some people that feel as though it is a call for the destruction of the state of Israel, which is how some people understand it. That's not how I understand it. I see it as a call for liberation of a people who've been seriously and consistently oppressed and marginalized in their own homeland for a very long time. Yeah. And I also think in this moment, if we want to, if we want Palestine to be free, then we need to be getting on board with the demands of the Palestinian liberation movement, and we need to be fighting in solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters and siblings. I've personally brought myself to the point where at first in a previous version of myself, did have some discomfort with some of the ways in which Palestinian movements describe their calls for freedom and for liberation. And I had to do a lot of inner work to figure out why I was feeling that way, what that was bringing up for me, learn about the history of the slogan and of the idea, talk to people, build relationships, be in community, and then move past it. And I also think in a similar way to the way that the conversation exploded around abolition 4 years ago, we're seeing a mass consciousness awakening in this movement, in this moment around Palestine. And folks, I think, are having a quicker evolution around some of these ideas than they might have had before, especially Jews. And there are more Jews that are joining the movement for a free Palestine now than at any point previously, that are seeing what's been happening and learning that it's actually much clearer than they think, and that these ideas of things being complicated or complex or confusing are kind of a distraction to think about the ways that things are actually real. And the last thing I'll say is, you back to this point about the students, I have been so impressed with the clarity, the consciousness, the political will, the bravery, the strategy, and the thoughtfulness of these students. The way they plan their actions, the way they issue their statements, the clarity with which they're focusing on what's going on right now and thinking about how to bring attention to Gaza and to Palestine. The bravery, which many of them are just exposing themselves to enormous personal risk, physical bodily risk, and also like academic and legal repercussions for their actions. I'm just so inspired by them, and I'm grateful that we have their voice leading the way in this conversation, because I think the fight's going to be a long one.
Yeah, and also like I'm incredibly inspired by them too. I mean, just to even see these little babies be thrown down steps, I'm like, y'all just like, they're virgins to this bullshit. Like, leave them alone. Yeah, they are our sort of moral barometer at this point, and they are literally telling you we're on the wrong side right now. And to quail those voices and to try to like silence them, I think is just such. Just an act against humanity. It's just like, duh, like this is a really great moment. So I'm inspired by them as well. I'm inspired by you too. I really appreciate that. And I kind of lied. I have one more question for you. Okay. Which is about just your experience. Were you always at a point where you sort of saw the world through this anti-Zionist lens, or through this kind of like the typical way that maybe a Jewish person is oriented in America or in Israel, which is to believe that you are owed this birthright, like this is where your people are from and this is where you should go? Did you have to like go through a process to sort of unlearn that, or did your parents kind of like, what was that journey for you?
I was born a perfect, fully formed anti-Zionist. No, I'm just kidding.
I know. I was like, wow.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I went on birthright. Like I went on one of these like trips that is funded by like mostly wealthy philanthropists here, and also some funding from the state of Israel. that supports young people in going to Israel to develop a kind of transformative, loving relationship with the state of Israel. I had a kind of seed of an awakening on that trip and in that journey. It took a while for that perspective to develop, and many people who were very patient with me. And I think to this point about being in multicultural kind of collective liberation movements or in coalition with other people, to this point that we were speaking about earlier, means that we're going to fuck up. And if we're going to build bigger, stronger movements, we are going to need to hold each other through those fuck ups, and we get stronger as a result of it. But to answer your question, no, I was not fully formed when I started, and I feel like I'm still learning. Like, I'm probably going to look back on this conversation a few years from now and be like, man, I said that. I don't know.
That's how it be.
And be like, we're always learning and we're always growing. And I think if we root ourselves in relationship with one another, and like our kind of North Star is being in relationship with others who are fighting for collective liberation and who are in this struggle together, and we're building together towards something, and we like fight and struggle with one another and push one another, but we're still kind of fighting toward that goal. We'll make each other better, and we'll get stronger. But I'm learning every day. I'm noticing evolutions in my political consciousness, and yeah, it took a while to like really wake up to what's going on and to have this kind of development in consciousness. But I'm really grateful for it.
That's a great point to end on. I really, really appreciate that. So last thing, tell people where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, Jake B. Levin. I, like I said, do a lot of organizing with an amazing organization called Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. You can find me there. And yeah, I look forward to seeing folks out in the streets and conversations and organizing in the future. And I think conversations like this are where it's at. Super important.
Yes, and I'm really grateful for you being here. And we're going to make sure that we put all of the information so people can find you.
Great.
But I think it's really important that we mention the organizations, support the organizations that are doing this, support the actual organizers, because the organizers don't always have the following, right? Like organizers aren't always the people who have a bazillion followers, so it's important to like call these things out. So
yeah, and I'll also say I'm an organizer that is involved in a lot of this organizing, but there are a lot of folks who've been doing this for a lot longer, and who are brilliant and who I encourage you to follow. And also, I think it's great to give to organizers, and also one of the really big needs in this moment is funds that can support people evacuating from Gaza.
Yes.
And there are many of you, I'm sure, have seen these GoFundMes that have been going around. In this kind of grassroots fundraising that's been happening is super important and is materially transformative in people being able to evacuate from Gaza and get to safety, which is, a whole spiral because it's forced dispossession, and you're paying for people to experience forced dispossession and become refugees. And also, there are many Gazans who need this financial support to be able to leave, and there are a lot of people who are helping to coordinate these evacuations. And I would encourage you to give to Gaza and give to these direct evacuation fundraisers, maybe before you give to some larger organizations that maybe have more state funding or have more resources.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jake. I really appreciate your time. You are amazing. Thank you for doing the good work. Thank you for everyone at home for watching. Please make sure that you follow Jake, follow us here at The Stranger Fruit. Make sure you click that follow button and the subscribe button, and we will see you next time.